the qualities of a ideal ruler or king. And the first thing, in order to be an ideal king, is you have to know who Krishna is, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So he says, Esavai Bhagavan Shakshad, Adyo Narayana Pumam, Mohayan Mayaya Lokam, Gudas Charati Vrishnisu. So he says, this Sri Krishna is no other than the inconceivable original personality of Godhead. He is the first Narayana, the supreme enjoyer. But he is moving amongst the descendants of King Vrishni, just like one of us, and he is bewildering us with his self-created energy. So this is interesting. Why does he say that Krishna is the first Narayana? So exactly how many Narayanas are there? Infinite number. Every planet in the spiritual world, in Vaikuntha, part of the spiritual world, has a Narayana expansion on it. And so, and there are innumerable planets in Vaikuntha. So there's not just one Narayana, but the first Narayana is something that is special. The example is given of 1,000 candles that are lit. But how did they get lighted up? There was an original candle that lit the others. So that original, if he says that Krishna is the first Narayana, that means that all the Narayanas come from Krishna. And he is the first one that from which all the others are expanded. So in the purport, Srila Prabhupada says, the Vedic system of acquiring knowledge is the deductive process. So you have pratyaksha, anumana, and shabda. That is, these are three pramanas, or ways of attaining knowledge. And the first is by direct perception, by the eyes and the ears and the nose and the tongue and the skin, but mainly by the eyes. And that's imperfect. Your knowledge will be imperfect because we have 4 fundamental defects. And therefore, no matter how much we try, we'll never be able to understand the absolute truth simply by direct perception. And then there's anumana, that is the inductive method. In other words, if there's smoke, there must be fire. So you assume that there's fire somewhere because you're seeing the smoke. So it is, and the inductive process of knowledge also includes experimentation. And like, for example, when they were studying light, at one point they found out that there was certain aspects of light that they had never known about, and one scientist was able to discover that. And so, as people have more and more experience, they discover more and more things about ordinary things that they see every day, but then they realize that there's much more subtlety to it. So, just like also the sound, elephants can hear things hear certain frequencies that human beings can't hear. And therefore they have much more acute perception of hearing than a human being. a human being has a certain range of, I think it's called megahertz that that they can hear. The elephant has a bigger range. So we see that there are a lot of limitations due to our imperfect senses, and the fact that we make mistakes, we're easily illusioned, and our senses are limited and imperfect, and we also have a cheating propensity. So the deductive process, so we have direct perception, we have the inductive process, which is basically a scientific, the scientists' approach to things. They'll do a lot of experiments, and they try and find a pattern, and based on that pattern, they form a theory, and so forth, and or they get a hint of something that's a little bit beyond their perception. So they have microscopes, and they have telescopes, and have other, instruments to improve or enhance their visual arts or hearing capacity, etc. So, but it's always going to be incomplete because of the 4 defects of the human being. And there are certain things that they can never really perceive simply with experimentation or direct perception, etc. Like, for example, how are they going to see the soul? The soul is smaller than an atom. And how are they going to see the supersoul? The supersoul is smaller than the soul. So how are they ever going to see these things? It's impossible. But they still exist. Okay, so now what is the deductive process? The deductive process, there's the materialistic deductive process, and then there's the spiritual deductive process. So the spiritual deductive process means you start with an a priori truth of the Vedas, and then you begin to, like, for example, I'll give an example. Prabhupada was told that the United States put a man on the moon. And Prabhupada said, I don't believe it. They said, what? We saw it on television. He said, that doesn't mean anything. And then the devotee said, well, why do you say you don't believe it? We saw it with our own eyes. He said, because the moon is described, first of all, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, the moon is farther away than the sun. And they say it's much closer than the sun. Number 2, the moon is described in the Vedas as a heavenly planet. And they say there's nothing there. It's just a bunch of rocks and dirt, and there's not even any, and craters, and there's not even any water there. So Prabhupada says, because he's using deductive logic based on the a priori truths of the Vedas. A priori means they're self-evident. So, therefore, he said, I don't believe they went to the moon. So that is spiritual deductive process. The material deductive process, you make a guess, or you think that something may be true, and then you assume that it is true, and then you use deductive reasoning. Like, for example, you say, I don't believe that all men are mortal. Okay? And then you start to use your deductive reasoning. You say, well, if all men are not mortal, then I should find someone who's eternal. So then you start looking around for someone that's eternal, and you never find that person. So then you know that your first premise is wrong, right? But if you say, well, maybe I'll suppose that all men are mortal, and and John is a man. So now you chronicle John's history, and you find out that he died. Well, then that proves that. So, in other words, if you deduct, you'd say, well, if John is a man, and all men are mortal, then he should die at some time. So you wait, and he actually dies, and then your deduction is confirmed by reality. So then you know that your premise is true. See, so, but they begin with a guess. They don't but the spiritual deduction begins with the a priori truths, and a priori means self-evident truths of the Vedas. So that's the difference. And if you do that, you don't waste any time, and it's much more effective, and you don't waste money on useless experimentation and so forth. So even up until today, most people believe that the United States went to the moon. And in 1969, when there were television pictures of the moon landing, Prabhupada said, I don't believe it. And, so this is like what, almost, it's 51 years or 52 years after the so-called moon landing. But are they going to the moon? No. They're still trying to go back to the moon. They stopped trying to go to the moon. They're trying to go to Mars. Have they gone to Mars? No, they haven't gone to Mars either. So maybe they sent some robot to Mars, but that's not really giving them any information. So therefore, the whole thing is a hoax. It's based on cheating. I have a friend of mine who had he was a competitor of SpaceX, of Elon Musk, right, and Bezos, and he was getting grants to be able to send robots to the asteroids and bring back precious metals and minerals and things like that. So I told him, I think it's like 8 years ago now, 8 to 10 years ago. I told him, don't waste your money. I said, you're not going to go anywhere. He said, no. I'm going to go to the moon, or I'm going to go to the asteroids, and I said, you're wasting your time. You can't even go from India to America unless you have a visa, and you have inoculations and shots, and you can prove you have so much money. I mean, how are you going to go to the moon or to an asteroid? Those are different planets, and they have their own governments and things. That said, no. There's nobody there. I said, you don't know. So anyway, his whole thing failed, and he gave it up. He lost a lot of money also. Right. So we see that if you believe the Shastra, you're going to save a lot of time and money, and you're not going to be misled by false hopes. So here Prabhupada says, the Vedic system of acquiring knowledge is the deductive process, a spiritual deduction. We begin with the truths of the Vedas, and then we use deductive reasoning, like Prabhupada did about the moon landing. The Vedic knowledge is received perfectly by disciplic succession from authorities. Such knowledge is never dogmatic, as ill-conceived by less intelligent persons. Okay, now, what does he mean here? This Vedic knowledge is not dogmatic. Well, dogmatic means that there's some so-called person who has maybe some political power or military power, and they're forcing you to believe something, and you have no choice but to believe it, whether it's true or not. So it's a dogma. It may be true, it may be not true. Usually it's not true. So such knowledge is never dogmatic, as ill-conceived by less intelligent persons. So that means that the Vedic knowledge, you're not forced to believe it. But if you accept it, then you can test it. You see? Dogma is something that you're forced to believe. Right? Just like the Catholic Church, you have to believe that Jesus resurrected from the dead, that he died and resurrected from the dead, and that he was born by immaculate conception. And there's a whole bunch of things you have to believe. You can't question it. Now, is that good or bad? Well, we're not going to argue whether it's good or bad, but that's what dogma is. It's something that you're forced to believe, and you can't question it. Okay, so, but the Vedic knowledge is not dogmatic, because you can test it. And Prabhupada says, the mother is the authority to verify the identity of the father. She's the authority for such confidential knowledge. Therefore, authority is not dogmatic. In the Bhagavad Gita, this truth is confirmed in the 4th chapter, 4.2. And the perfect system of learning is to receive it from authority. The very same system is accepted universally as truth, but only the false arguer speaks against it. So, receiving knowledge from an authority, that is what the Vedic process is. What's the authority? Well, Vedas are originally spoken by Krishna himself, and he doesn't have the 4 defects of ordinary human beings. So, he is an absolutely transcendental authority, and now, but that doesn't mean you have to. You're forced to accept it. You can test it on your own. Like, for example, Krishna says that sense gratification will always lead to misery. But you can test it. Look at the history of the world. It's just like, what's his name? Abu Bakr. He was the leader of ISIS. Now, he engaged in a lot of sense gratification, capturing women and abusing them in different ways, and capturing people and killing a lot of people and so forth. And he was the caliph. He was the caliph of the Iraq and Syria and so forth. And at one point, it looked like he was like on top of the world. He had invaded and conquered large parts of Syria and Iraq, and he lost everything. And he was killed in a very, very horrible way, cowardly also. He and his family, So, sense gratification always is followed by misery. You can test it, right? So, if you look look at Harvey Weinstein, look at Jeffrey Epstein, look at this one and that one. They all had plenty of sense gratification, and it was all followed by misery. Right? Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide. Harvey Weinstein is in jail. Right? And then we can go down the list. It's not that you have to be famous. Anybody who engages in sense gratification, it will always be followed by misery. It's the law of nature. It's like gravity. Okay, so in the Bhagavad Gita, the truth is confirmed in the 4th chapter, Bhagavad Gita 4.2. So, what is that verse? Let's take a look at it. I have my idea what it is, but I just want to make sure. 4.2 is... Yeah. Ivam parampara praptam imam raja sayovidu sakalinaha mahata yoganasta parantapa. This supreme science was thus received through the chain of disciplic succession and the saintly kings understood it in that way. But in course of time, the succession was broken, and therefore the science as it is appears to be lost. Well, he says, in the Bhagavad Gita, this truth, that is, that you must receive knowledge from an authority. This truth is confirmed in the 4th chapter, Bhagavad Gita 4.2. And the perfect system of learning is to receive it from authority. The very same system is accepted universally as truth. But only the false arguer speaks against it. So what's a false arguer? Like one time this person called me up. He was an Armenian man that lives in California, and he had read something that I had on my web. I have a web page with stories and wisdom and different things. And he was interested that how did I get this knowledge? And I said, well, I have a guru, and I'm a disciple. And he said, well, I don't believe in that. I want to find out the truth myself. I said, that'll never work. He said, what do you mean it'll never work? Of course it works. So he was really adamant about, he wants to find out the truth himself. He's not going to accept the guru and surrender or anything like that. So you see, people argue against this, just like Prabhupada is saying here. But only the false arguer speaks against it. Against what? Parampara, accepting disciplic succession, accepting a bona fide teacher of spiritual science. So, therefore, for example, modern spacecraft fly in the sky. And when scientists say that they travel to the other side of the moon, men believe these stories blindly because they have accepted modern scientists as authorities. See, Prabhupada is talking about going to the moon here. The authorities speak, and the people in general believe them. But in the case of Vedic truths, they have been taught not to believe. Even if they accept them, they give a different interpretation. Each and every man wants a direct perception of Vedic knowledge, but foolishly they deny it. This means that the misguided man can believe one authority, the scientist, but will reject the authority of the Vedas. The result is that people have degenerated. There you go. So ultimately, the most important decision you make in your life is choosing an authority, because as soon as you accept someone as an authority, you'll believe what they say. So most people choose to believe the scientists, just like, President Trump. He says it, or no, let's look at Governor Jay Inslee. Every speech he gives, he says, we're basing what we're doing on science. We're not like the president that, makes things up. Why don't you inject Clorox and it'll kill the germs? That's a bunch of nonsense. We're based on science, right? Well, you see, he doesn't accept Vedic authority, right? So he accepts science, and most people accept science today as authority. They say, oh, well, the scientist said so. Dr. Fauci said, you're going to have 1 million deaths. Well, wait a minute. We're only around 60,000 so far, right? We're far away from 1 million deaths. So, it's all speculation and nonsense, right? So, but in the case of Vedic truths, they've been taught not to believe. Even if they accept them, they give a different interpretation. Yeah, they give the Mayavadi interpretation. Each and every man wants a direct perception of Vedic knowledge, but foolishly they deny it. This means that the misguided man can believe one authority, the scientist, but will reject the authority of the Vedas. The result is that people have degenerated. Here is an authority speaking about Krishna. He's talking about Bhisma Pitamaha. As the original personality of Godhead and the first Narayana. Even such an impersonalist as Acharya Sankara has said in the beginning of his commentation on Bhagavad Gita that Narayana, the personality of Godhead, is beyond the material creation. The universe is one of the material creations, but Narayana is transcendental to such material paraphernalia. Bhismadeva is one of the 12 Mahajans who know the principles of transcendental knowledge. His confirmation of Lord Shri Krishna's being the original personality of Godhead is also corroborated by the impersonalist Sankara. All other acharyas have also confirmed this statement, and thus there is no chance of not accepting Lord Shri Krishna as the original personality of Godhead. Because Bhismadeva is a Mahajan. He's a top authority on who is Krishna and what is the truth. So he's an incontrovertible authority. You can't deny him, right? Just like there are 12 Mahajans, like Prahlad Maharaj and Lord Shiva and Bhisma Pitamaha and Vyasadeva and so forth. These are top authorities in the whole history of the world. So all the acharyas have confirmed this statement that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And thus there is no chance of not accepting Lord Shri Krishna as the original personality of Godhead. Bhismadeva says that he is the first Narayana. This is also confirmed by Brahmaji in the Bhagavatam 10:14-14. So Brahma is also a Mahajan. Krishna is the first Narayana. In the spiritual world, Vaikuntha, there are unlimited numbers of Narayanas who are all the same personality of Godhead and are considered to be the plenary expansions of the original personality of Godhead, Shri Krishna. The first form of the Lord, Shri Krishna, first expands himself in the form of Baladeva, and Baladeva expands in so many other forms such as Sankarshan, Pradumna, Aniruddha, Vasudeva, Narayana, Purusha, Rama, and Nrsimha. All these expansions are one and the same Vishnu Tattva, and Shri Krishna is the original source of all the plenary expansions. He is therefore the direct personality of Godhead. He is the creator of the material world, and he is the predominating deity known as Narayana in all the Vaikuntha planets. Therefore, his movements among human beings are another sort of bewilderment. The Lord therefore says in the Bhagavad Gita that foolish persons consider him to be one of the human beings without knowing the intricacies of his movements. The bewilderment regarding Shri Krishna is due to the action of his twofold internal and external energies upon the third one called marginal energy. The living entities are expansions of his marginal energy, and thus they are sometimes bewildered by the internal energy and sometimes by the external energy. Like, for example, Mother Yasoda is bewildered by the internal energy. And Donald J. Trump is put into illusion by the external energy, right? So one is in illusion both ways, But the internal energy illusion is good because it brings you closer to Krishna. But the external energy is bad because it takes you away from Krishna. So it says here, Shri Krishna expands himself into unlimited numbers of Narayanas and exchanges or accepts transcendental loving service from the living entities in the transcendental world. And by his external energetic expansions, he incarnates himself in the material world among the men, animals, or demigods to reestablish his forgotten relation with the living entities in different species of life. Great authorities like Bhisma, however, escape his bewilderment by the mercy of the Lord. So, when Krishna comes as Lord Nrsimhadev, as he's going to come this next week, everybody's bewildered except Prahlad Maharaj. He's not, although he's only like 5-6 years old, but he's not bewildered because he knows who Krishna is. And this absolutely fantastic, inconceivable being that's half lion, half man, that's his Lord. Therefore, he wasn't afraid. But everybody else was afraid, including Lakshmi Devi, the eternal consort of Narayana or Vishnu. She was also afraid to go up, go even near Nrsimhadev. But Brahma asked Prahlad to take a garland and put it on Nrsimhadev's neck so that he would calm down. And Prahlad said, "Sure, I'll do it. I'm not afraid. I know who that is. That's my Lord Krishna. So you see that The devotees are not illusioned by the external energy of the Lord. They always recognize Krishna, even though he's appearing sometimes as Matsya Avatar or Varaha or Shringadev, etc. And Krishna appears in every species. They're all his children, right? They're all his praja. So he appears in every species to help the living entities go back to Godhead. Okay. So this is a very interesting purport and verse. Very significant verse. And so the next one, and then we'll stop. O King, Lord Shiva, Narada, the great sage among the demigods, and Kapila, the incarnation of Godhead, all know very confidentially about his, meaning Krishna's glories, through direct contact. So Bhisma Pitama is telling Yudhisthira, look, Lord Shiva knows who this is, who Krishna is, and Narada knows him, and Kapila Dev knows him. And they have confidential knowledge about his glories through direct contact. So in the purport, Prabhupada says, pure devotees of the Lord are all bhavas, or persons who know the glories of the Lord in different transcendental loving services. As the Lord has innumerable expansions of his plenary form, there are innumerable pure devotees of the Lord who are engaged in the exchange of service of different humors, meaning rasas. Ordinarily, there are 12 great devotees of the Lord, namely Brahma, Narada, Shiva, Kumara, Kapila, Manu, Prahlada, Bhisma, Janaka, Sukadeva Goswami, Bali Maharaj, and Yamaraj. Bhismadeva, although one of them, has mentioned only 3 important names of the 12 who know the glories of the Lord. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, one of the great acharyas in the modern age, explains that Anubhava, or the glory of the Lord, is first appreciated by the devotee in ecstasy, manifesting the symptoms of perspiring, trembling, weeping, bodily eruptions, etc., which are further enhanced by steady understanding of the glories of the Lord. Such different understandings of bhavas are exchanged between Yasoda and the Lord, binding Lord by ropes, and in the chariot driving by the Lord in the exchange of love with Arjuna. These glories of the Lord are exhibited in his being subordinated before his devotees, and that is another feature of his being subordinated, and that is another feature of the glories of the Lord. Sukadeva Goswami and the Kumaras, although situated in the transcendental position, became converted by another feature of bhava and turned into pure devotees of the Lord. Well, Sukadeva Goswami was impersonalist, not a Mayavadi, but an impersonalist. And the Kumaras also, they did not know that, they were also somewhat impersonalists, but again, not Mayavadis, but genuine impersonalists. That means that they have the possibility of advancing. A Mayavadi cannot advance because they don't believe there's Vaikuntha, they don't believe there's Goloka Vrindavan, they don't believe Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. They don't believe that individuality exists. It's just it's an illusion for them. So how are they going to become top spiritual authorities? No way. So, and he says, tribulations imposed upon the devotees by the Lord constitute another exchange of transcendental bhava between the Lord and the devotees. Now, this is a very big point. The Lord says, I put my devotee into difficulty, and thus the devotee becomes more purified in exchanging transcendental bhava with me. Placing the devotee into material troubles necessitates delivering him from the illusory material relationships. The material relationships are based on reciprocation of material enjoyment, which depends mainly on material resources. Meaning you have to have money to enjoy material, to have a material enjoyment. Therefore, when material resources are withdrawn by the Lord, in other words, when there's a coronavirus and people lose their jobs and they're not able to make their money, the devotee is 10% attracted toward the transcendental loving service of the Lord. So instead of smoking marijuana, by the way, there are more overdoses of opioids right now because people are sitting around at home. They don't know what's going to happen. So they're shooting up cocaine, or they're shooting up opium or whatever, right? And they're dying of overdoses, more so than normally. Thus the Lord snatches the fallen soul, but in the case of devotees, when there's trouble, they become more serious about spiritual life. And they become 10% attracted toward the transcendental loving service of the Lord. Thus the Lord snatches the fallen soul from the mire of material existence. Tribulation, the mire meaning the filth and the unhealthy situation. Thus the Lord snatches the fallen soul from the mire of material existence. Tribulations offered by the Lord to his devotee are different from the tribulations resulting from vicious action, meaning sinful action. All these glories of the Lord are especially known to the great Mahajans like Brahma, Shiva, Narada, Kapila, Kumara, and Bhisma, as mentioned above, and one is able to grasp it by their grace. So, when there is trouble, and there's always trouble in the material world, if it's not one thing, it's going to be another thing. If it's not another thing, it'll be a third thing. If it's not the third thing, it'll be the fourth thing. But there's always going to be trouble, right? That's the nature of this material world. But the devotee is not afraid of that. The devotee sees that as an opportunity to become more serious about Krishna consciousness, rather than becoming more serious about taking more opium or more drugs, say. So I thought this would be a good thing to hear today, because we're in, the second or third month of coronavirus. It doesn't look like it's going to go away very soon. And who knows what's going to happen. A lot of strange things are going to happen. But we should become more serious about Krishna consciousness. So here Prabhupada says, I put my devotee into difficulty, and thus the devotee becomes more purified in exchanging transcendental bhava with me. And Prabhupada says, placing the devotee into material troubles necessitates delivering him from the illusory material relationships. The material relations are based on reciprocation of material enjoyment, which depends mainly on material resources. Well, if you cut out the resources, you cut out the material enjoyment, what do you have? Well, for a normal person, nothing. It's enough to go crazy and commit suicide. But the devotee is not so interested in material sense gratification. They're more interested in being very regulated in devotional service. So, you take away, and the devotees are, let's say, very frugal as far as spending money on sense gratification. And they only spend money on essential things and don't waste it. So if there are hard times, it's not really that hard for the devotee, because they've always living very simply. There's a saying, if you live at home without any debt, you're a happy man. So this debt problem is a real problem, because it puts people in anxiety. How am I going to pay this? How am I going to pay that? Where's the money going to come from? So it's enough to drive a person crazy. So therefore, one must live. Well, my father told me, in your opulent days, live frugally, so that in your frugal days, you'll live opulently. Right. So that's old village wisdom, right? So people usually, in their opulent days, they live opulently, right? But no, in your opulent days, you should live frugally, so that in your frugal days, you can live opulently. So it doesn't mean that you're going to spend a lot of money lavishly during the coronavirus thing. You're going to continue living very simply as you did before, and you're not affected. Whereas people who have a very high style of living, when there's the need for austerity, they go crazy. They say, "What? I can't use my golden toilet anymore. What? I got to sell it just to live and to buy some food. This is crazy. I can't do that. So to separate themselves from their wealth is like, well, it's like better to be dead than to do that. Right? Okay, so are there any questions? All right, no questions, no answers. All glories to Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much. Haribol.